My lord, the great houses have answered. They refuse to honor your ascendancy.
We await your orders. Is Al-Gaib? Lead them to paradise.
What is going on here? What is it that resonates with us here in the 21st century, in this world of binary and pixel, with us here in the West, the most secular, irreligious, unnomadic, prosperous people of all time? We have no prophecies, we have no sacred writing, we call no monsters from the deep. We don't tell stories like this quite as often nowadays, we don't feel them quite so deeply nowadays. Our sci-fi superheroes and even sci-fi gods, they're things of the future. They crack jokes that are terribly self-aware.
What master do you serve? What master do I serve? What am I supposed to say, Jesus?
They destroy planets, universes, with a single snap. They have spinning wings and flashing lasers. Our modern heroes do not fight with ancient knives by sunset to marry those they do not love. Our modern heroes do not quote from dusty, sacred texts. What is it that we would feel this at the heart of a modern story? We have no religion. We have seen beyond. We have supercomputers and holographic models and consciousness gone digital. We are not an age of ritual, of chosen ones walking tracks long carved, of zealots triumphant over skeptics, of warriors flush with religious fire. Even our fantasy is not really religious. Sure, religion is a theme some people believe and they gain power with it. And we do still study it, and we do still feel some echoing of true conviction, but it's usually a far more academic, a far more gritty study. That's actually why Game of Thrones is so raw and realistically complex. It's asking intimate, particular questions about intimate, particular characters. Consider Westeros alongside Arrakis. In both worlds, religion is a genuine tool of politics, but the Red Woman, the Maesters, the High Sparrow, they're not really motivated by true zeal, certainly not apolitical zeal. In Dune, they believe. Not the Bene Gesserit, who plant the seeds and are then overcome. No, the Fremen, who overcome, they believe. As Irulan says, it's in their faith that possibility is created, and they find dominion in their faith. Consider Martin's villains, Tyrion, Cersei, Jaime, the Hound. They fascinate us. We learn about them hungrily, and then at a certain point we empathize with them. Dune's villains, the Baron, the Emperor, Feyd-Rautha, they're not empathized with, not because they're written so much more poorly or carelessly than Martin's, though they might be somewhat, but because the questions they pose are very different. The structures they inhabit are these very cold, sweeping, calculated structures of Herbert's world, of when is a hero not a hero, and what is the place of violence, and what is the power of faith? Martin toys with these questions, but somewhat tangentially. He doesn't ask when is a hero not a hero, but rather observes, wow guys, heroes certainly have a lot of villainous qualities, and villains have some heroic qualities, and oftentimes our judgment of them depends on where we're standing, and let's actually study how where we're standing comes about, and how much control or lack thereof we might have with our various disparate personalities and such. I mean, I'm not sure that really captures it, but I think you know what I'm saying. Martin is really digging into the nuance of the individual, whereas Herbert's characters aren't even really individuals. For a civilization nearly wiped out by computers, they sometimes act very much like computer-perfect incarnations of character tropes, I guess. Where Herbert asks, what is the place of violence, Martin affirms violence is necessary, all-pervasive, inevitable, and then he asks somewhat more personal, intimate questions, like, what does violence do to us individually? What if we are this sort of person? What if we are this sort of person? The structure of the society isn't really in question. The question is, more narrowly, what is the landscape of the human psyche and experience as relates to this structure? Is that a good way to say it? I don't know. But Herbert, he's kind of a macro philosopher, and Villeneuve has embraced that here with Stilgar and the hush of fate and sacred words.
Genesis water. When we have enough water, the Lisan al-Gaib will change the face of Arrakis. He will bring back the trees, he will bring back a green paradise.
Dune was a fascinating experience. It's slow, it's stiff, it's archetype and allegory. The world and the politics, the questions that the story asks, the characters and their portrayal, they're all very broad-brushed, very overarching. It's not a modern story. And I do have my complaints, which are also echoed by quite a few others, particularly those who know the books. I'll address those elsewhere though. Check below, I'll link when ready. Complaints aside, Dune was glorious. Despite all this archetype and sweeping stiffness, it was somehow engaging. Despite the postured politics of every moment, the archaic sort of flatness of the scripting and delivery.
But Arrakis is Arrakis. And the desert takes the weak. My desert. My Arrakis. My Dune.
Despite the postured politics of every moment, the archaic sort of flatness of the scripting and delivery, it was engaging. It gave chills, and others report experiencing the same. Lots of others report experiencing the same. Now, I should admit I can be just a bit tuned out when it comes to the film world in general. I watch some on my own, I rewatch a lot of my favorites, but it's not like I pay a ton of attention to the ongoing currents of film culture. But when I pay attention, I do pay attention, and I've seen here that people are making claims of timelessness, actual ecstasy, life-changing experience, perfect embodiment of everything a film can be. And it's strange because it's really basic in a lot of ways. It's a simpler, more formulaic, more archaic story.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
What is this? What is it that resonates here in our modern age, here in the wealthy, indulgent West, as far from Fremen fundamentalism as humans have ever been? Am I mad, or do I sense in the memes and Reddits and tweets and the edits on YouTube, do I sense a hunger for this sort of embodied dedication Paul inspires, the totality of ritual, the blinding drop of blue, the heartbeat of survival that is found in faith? I may be mad. This may be overdramatic. It may be just because I myself am obsessed with ritual and faith, but because of this, I feel I might be uniquely poised to notice a trend in our society. I'm not only, you see, an incredibly hardworking and successful YouTuber, but I'm a freelance writer and editor. And a freelance writer and editor specifically of philosophy, mythology, comparative religion, and speculative fiction. That's sci-fi, fantasy, historical fiction. Just to be clear, I don't write mythology yet. But I analyze mythology. I'm kind of an amateur. I'm mostly into philosophy and storytelling. Hence this channel and its somewhat kind of mixed content, which I don't really know quite how to aim, and every time I publish a video of one sort, I'm afraid it'll drive away 2/3 of my audience. But hey, these are my interests, nay, my passions, and for me, they do converge, so why not for others? I say that storytelling is the end of philosophy. Indeed, storytelling encapsulates the essence of language, speculation through symbol, beyond pure rationality, in the realm of the subconscious, the boldness of the poet that reaches into the haze beyond. This is maybe the fullest embodiment of what we are. We did not start as beings of science. Science is a discipline, but it's like a guiding trellis. It's neither the seed nor the full flower, neither the beginning nor the end of understanding. That sounds rather Herbert-esque, I think. Deep in the human unconscious is a pervasive need for a logical universe that makes sense. But the real universe is always one step beyond logic. A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding must flow with the process, must join it and flow with it. Belief can be manipulated. Only knowledge is dangerous. Confine yourself to observing and you always miss the point of your life. The object can be stated this way: live the best life you can. Life is a game whose rules you learn if you leap into it and play it to the hilt. Otherwise, you are caught off balance, continually surprised by the shifting play. Non-players can whine and complain that luck always passes them by. They refuse to see that they can create some of their own luck. Herbert was a philosopher. It's overt in his work, and it's overt in Villeneuve's film. Ironically, in my mind, it's this sort of very meticulous, grandiose philosophy that holds the story back from really resonating on that deep, intimate level it would need for me to consider it one of my true favorites. But it is a very good film, and it will be a classic. I do believe this, and it will be a classic because of this meticulous and grandiose philosophy. I need to acknowledge that as well. And beyond the stiffness of the script...
What are you guys laughing about?
Don't bother.
And the overtness of the philosophy.
Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings obliteration.
And the unfacetedness, the bluntness of the politics.
Old-fashioned artillery. Genius. We're literally melting rock on their heads.
Well, that was easy.
Beyond these more archaic and impersonal facts, this is the heartbeat of the story.
The constellation that points to the North Star we call Muad'Dib, the one who points the way. That is a powerful name. Now you are our brother. Ol Muad'Dib Usul.
This is the heartbeat of the story. And it's perfectly Herbert and perfectly Villeneuve. It's when the cinema is still, just the grandness of idea conveyed through images in slow and gorgeous motion, uncluttered by dialogue or music. It's the hush of destiny converging on the moment. The heart of Dune is where something so absurd as the voice makes us tremble, with the knowledge that something true has been shown here. True about not only Paul and the Reverend Mother, but about our lives, about courage and understanding, and how they link to actual power. The heart of Dune is where something so alien to us as zeal is the very thing that makes us embrace the story most completely. The heart of Dune is where the dilution or the caricaturing of Stilgar's character becomes somehow so resonant and genuine in Javier Bardem's portrayal that it stops feeling like a caricature at all. That's the core, of course. Javier Bardem, Stilgar, blue eyes turned to the sky in rapture. Sheath Geem, Shari.
Sheath Geem, Shari.
At the core of the story is an affirmation of the sacred. What a thing to say in 2024, eh? So anyway, for your consideration, in this video I will look at paradox, at ritual, at how they come together to form identity. I'll look at the role faith has played in this, perhaps must play. I'll look at the modern longing for something primal to make us tremble. I'll look at the hush that comes before the storm. We'll look at holy war. What is it that in drinking you will die, and in dying you may see? Why does a line like this sound so terrifying when in a Marvel film it would only ever appear as a joke? What is it that makes us feel, for the first time in maybe years, that glory might be a valid concept? Well, except for Slava Ukraina. That still speaks of glory, but they're facing a war. They're infinitely closer to the Fremen than we are in our cinemas. So why do we long for glory, and why do we feel it in Stilgar's euphoric skyward gaze? I've had some experiences like Stilgar. Maybe not on such a scale or to such bloody effect. I didn't suffer so much for them, but then who has? Why do we tell stories, if not to paint ourselves more clearly, if not to make godlike everything that moves us, to set those gods against each other, to watch them fight, to see what happens when ideas, feelings, when different truths collide? So maybe I haven't been like Stilgar, but I've had some moments and I'm seeking more, though again hopefully not towards such apocalypse. The first I had were in the church, a rather charismatic evangelical modern Christian church, a place where the transcendent experiences are confirmations of the Holy Spirit, where euphoria is sought for. I had it there, within the fellowship and the doctrine of the American Christian. I've seen it other places, though. I've lived in Romania, in Israel, Egypt, Indonesia, China, Thailand. I've sat with animists, with Buddhists, Muslims. I've sat in the supposed crypt of King David as Jews of some sort swayed and cried out with zeal. There's the shaman in Peru and Mexico, their ayahuasca and peyote. You can dive beyond yourself, dive into the fabric of the world through jungle or through desert. You may come to face the jaguar crouching, peering from the stars, or you may come to face yourself. Then there's the 21st century version, the raves and lab-made LSD, thousands bowing to electric figures in the stage light, neon glow sticks, phone lights now instead of flame. There's the Westerners shouting into volcanoes and making animal noises. There's retreats into the desert for which you can pay $4,000. There are yoga lessons broadcast across the World Wide Web. Interconnectedness, vibrations, frequencies, electromagnetism. Is it a joke or a fantastic miracle that we speak of these things in a yoga class on Zoom? What does Jamis mean when he says,
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. A process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it.
We can scoff, we can turn to skepticism, to our world of binary, we can quantify and model, build our houses square on square, but our world is not square, our world is not bit and binary. Bit and binary, to the degree they underpin us, are relevant and sensible only in relation, pattern. The modern day has taught us that it's us who see the patterns. We are the ones who say, hey look, a connectome looks like a tree, and synapses are smaller trees, and trees are in the world, and everything is connected. The stars make shapes, everything is spinning in relation, and math leads us to something deeper. But we do not see math. Seeing is not math. One of the greatest blows to my own religious faith was the realization that people experienced this all across the world through 100 different channels. I saw a post recently mocking Westerners who go to less developed places and act out the local rituals and then post about it. It's a common enough post, and it's a common enough post to mock. Mockery's understandable, but I suspect this is the place all cultures would end up for some time if they don't calcify and remain in dogmatic religion of the sort we would also decry. This is people looking for ritual, looking to embody a belief fully through more than just abstract reasoning. That's what we need to realize. Reason is actually an abstraction from how we truly live and change. In this age of digital, of reductionism, of endless science.
But nothing is hidden, everything is open to view. It's just philosophers who muddy the waters.
Professor Wittgenstein. You can't know this pain. Only I can.
Are you sure you know it? You don't doubt you had a pain just then?
How could I?
But if we can't speak of doubt here, we can't speak of knowledge either.
I don't follow.
It makes no sense to speak of knowing something in a context where we could not possibly doubt it. Therefore, to say, I know I am in pain is entirely senseless.
We're so removed from the bodily acting out of things, we feel the need to embody something sensory, but not only sensory and real. We need it to align with something actually important, greater than us, something that resonates in the body as well as the mind, and that transcends the individual moment or chemical or game. We cannot just play games. We are not convinced by games. Stilgar is not playing a game. But if you're acting, if you're retaining self-awareness constantly, subjecting everything to skepticism, then yeah, everything seems silly. Sartre and Camus observed this years ago, and many years before them, Socrates or Diogenes lived it out. No, we need to give ourselves to something without full understanding. This is the heart of experience, in some ways. Certainly one of the pillars. This is Woodstock and raves and protests. This is the skyrocketing use of drugs in the West. This is the shift towards adventurous or hippie travel. Speaking as an 8-year world traveler, usually the first people to establish a new destination are Western, and by that I mean kind of prosperous adventurers, real adventurers, before even backpackers come, before digital nomads come, before gap yearers, before tourists, before resorts go up and all is lost. Everywhere we see a need for ritual. I suspect most cultures would come to this, unless we change our biochemistry or find a way to be fully embodied while worshipping some AI god that we know is absolutely rational. And consider the cultures strawberry tourists try to emulate. when doing wild rituals. These cultures are more dogmatic, less developed, less rational. The life is more limited, to be honest, in all the sorts of ways Westerners don't really want to be limited. The things we would mock in these rituals are things we would prefer to keep at arm's length. The totality of belief, the dogma, the scarcity of lifestyle. The things we would praise are things we, the mockers, also seek. Nature, honesty, harmony, tradition, embodiment. I think maybe that's the key. That's why Stilgar brings such humanity to a film that's otherwise quite stiff and distant in its style. We're seeing a hunger for something old, but that we know we recognize. We hunger to believe something and to know it not through seeing the math scrawled out on a paper. We want to know things directly, with our bodies. And Abraham went into Sarai and knew her, and she conceived and bore a son. So we have Stilgar brought up believing, bleeding, losing lifelong friends, withholding water even for them, even for his sacred shield brother. Why? Because what they fought for was higher even than their friendship and the blood they shed. Because they fought for paradise. And what does paradise require? It requires that the most precious and most difficult, that is the exact thing to be treasured. Water is the currency of life, valuable anywhere, but most valuable on desolate Arrakis, and the giving up of water is the thing required to make Arrakis green again. Because how could it be otherwise? How else can paradise be brought about? This is every battle worth confronting. Arrakis is not an extreme twisting of the pattern of our lives. Arrakis is the clearest encapsulation of it. The sacred can be many things, but always it is difficult and rare. Always it requires sacrifice. The individual cannot choose it freely. It demands negotiation with the collective, with nature, with the future. That's what sacred is. It's the thing that carries you farther than all other things. It's the light that saves when things are at their very darkest. It's the shattered sword that, once reforged, gains the power that had fallen. With Elendil's corruption, Narsil was shattered. How else could it be? And only in overcoming this curse we all inherit could Aragorn earn the reforged blade. Could it find the new name Anduril? Could it only then come back into its power? Aragorn had to give up the comforts of his inheritance, had to fight in exile for decades, had to give up glory and temptation, even when offered by the one he had sworn to protect. He had to release this duty. He had to violate his oath in recognition of a greater need.
I would have gone with you to the end. Into the very fires of Mordor.
He had to accept the heavier, less familiar duty that came with his inheritance. He had to show forbearance and meekness in aiding another king, a truly lesser king. He had to call the greatness first from Theoden. He had to face death. And only then could he come into his destiny. Only then does the sacred bloom. Only then is he crowned. And still, in the way his forefather did not, he bows before the truth that saved them all, the deeper heart of Tolkien's message.
My friends. You bow to no one.
Even deeper than the courage in the kings of men, and their shining cities, and their towers, and their seeing stones. Even more than this, it's the Shire that saves humanity. Perhaps the heart of the Shire that lives within us. I'll note that here Jackson diverged from Tolkien for the sake of a clean film structure, understandable, skipping Saruman's poisoning of the Shire and opting for a simple homecoming. I mean, there's already sorrow enough in the end to wrap things up profoundly, but Tolkien suggested that even the Shire should be corrupted, threatened by the vindictiveness of greatness fallen low, by the great grinding wheel, the consuming narcissism of progress. Especially after his experience in the war, this was one of Tolkien's greatest villains. Even more than noble Aragorn, this is sacred for Tolkien. Sam and his flowers, Rosie and the ribbons in her hair, the party tree, cream and strawberries. This is what saves us. The essence of the sacred is not strict nature, though. It is relationship. The sacred emerges in the relationship between the human and the environment, between the human and their need. The sacred is a struggle between the two. This is Jacob wrestling with God and being renamed Israel, he who wrestles with God. This is Rama facing Rawan, the abductor of his wife, the flower of vitality and youth and light in long exile. This is Heracles wrestling Apollo for the divine tripod that can heal him of his outbursts. So the hobbits must pass through the antithesis of the Shire. Aragorn must lay down all the glory of his line, yet accept the grim responsibility. Kaladin, bound to an honor spren, must learn that to protect truly, you have to protect those that you hate, even those that will go on to fight you. Still you must choose over and over again that the deepest honor is only found when you're willing to lay your own honor aside. We know this. We find our truest selves in orienting towards something greater. This is Mecca, Brahman, Jerusalem. This is the sacred pool. Why Paul comes specifically from Caladan, I'm not certain, but what I'm certain of is Arrakis is the crystallization of our relationship with nature, with sacrifice, and with the sanctity that emerges. The worms are the things that killed the planet in the first place. They're the things that bring the houses and all the bloodshed in their wake, and the worms are the things that save the planet and the future. Much of the Fremen discipline and ability comes from their long use of spice. Yet again, in Herbert's way, there's another contradiction waiting. The spice works until it doesn't. They haven't made clear yet in the films, but Paul's entire vision is that the Empire is too unstable, that the concentration of power is too focused and therefore fragile. In order to stop humanity from eventual apocalypse, Paul, and more so his son, sees that they must give up the interconnected nature of their empire. They must limit the spacing guild, limit travel, and decentralize so that each isolated pocket of humanity can experiment with its own values and environment. God Emperor of Dune has a quote about paradoxes. Paradox is a pointer telling you to look beyond it. If paradoxes bother you, that betrays your deep desire for absolutes. The relativist treats a paradox merely as interesting, perhaps amusing, or even, dreadful thought, educational. Like my philosophy actually, Herbert's is all about tensions. Always a deeper question, always a contradiction, because how else would it be? Do you want to just take one idea infinitely far? Do you think just one single thing can serve you, never to challenge you again, never to grow even a fraction beyond the bounds of your environment? Once you take something as far as it goes, it always needs something else atop it. How else would it be? We humans seem to recognize paradox in everything, and this was certainly a theme of Herbert's. Paradoxes don't exist, of course. That's the defining feature of a paradox, but in seeing things as paradoxes, in searching for them, we remind ourselves of our finitude. We always question deeper. We remind ourselves that our wisdom will only serve so far before it must be challenged. So, in the very power that Paul and his son will exercise, there's the need to give it up. In the funeral rites that refuse even to shed tears for the dead, there's a promise of future life and gladness. In the humility of a concubine, both Paul and his father find the flexibility to love truly, free of political restriction. In Feyd-Rautha's savagery lies the secret to controlling him. The water of life, in drinking you will die, in dying you may see. In the humility of the desert mouse is the power to survive and hide and lead. In letting fear pass through, you overcome it. In Paul's compassion lies his weakness and the need for his son to actually become less human than he is. To save humanity, they must terrorize it in the manner of a dictator, yet once they're prepared, they must give up power completely and let humanity return to itself. These are the cycles Herbert's world goes through, over and over again, and I don't think he does a perfect job. Again, I say it's a very overt and sweeping sort of philosophy, and I think it does lose resonance because of that. It's also just a bit repetitive, but each time he tries to acknowledge the potential flaws in his ideas, each time he tries to explore a different variation of power or tribalism or technological potential. If you withhold a thing, if you make it sacred, it will become so. Then, if it is truly valuable, it will stay sacred, and it will resonate and grow in value. There will be use in its sanctity, and it will bind heart, and the pursuit of it will reflect true greatness, and the abuse of it will reflect true decadence. But if it's not actually valuable in our relationship with nature, it will come to have a place unmerited, and in holding it up, we will twist ourselves about. The posture of a society will become crooked. Every thread that leads up to the altar of our worship will become flawed. This is the Harkonnen homeworld. This is the Harkonnen value system. The difference between the sacred and profane, the difference between a true god and an idol, that is the narrow path of Paul, to wield power, a holy war, but rightly, for humanity. I mean, the reason he survives and Fade does not is, ironically, because of his humanity, his compassion.
But the heart is not meant to rule. In other words, your father was a weak man.
I so wanted him to say that line there in the sunset with the Emperor. Your father was a weak man, and then Paul says, my father is all that keeps me from becoming him. But to overcome Fade, Paul needs to temper his compassion. I'll also mention that in the novel there's a Count Fenring trained similarly to Paul, another possible Kwisatz Haderach, and in the confrontation at the very end, Herbert writes this scene. Oh, first of all, I think I'll rewind a little bit because this is also important. The second half, especially the climax of Dune, by the way, if you haven't read it, it's extremely fast-moving, rather like in the film. It has so much build-up. I think Jamis's funeral is like, I want to say halfway through, even farther, like 60% of the way through the book. So, kind of strange. It's a strangely paced book, for sure. But it's kind of key here in the confrontation with Feyd-Rautha. In the book, Feyd-Rautha has kind of a poison needle hidden in his hip, or like a belt on his hip, and his plan is to sort of stab Paul with it if he needs, and then it gets caught on like between two tiles or something on the floor when they're fighting, and oh, this is kind of in the way, whatever. And that's actually his undoing, so it's like his treachery is his undoing. Let's see. And it kind of leads up to the Fenring thing. I don't know if this is interesting to you guys, but you see it there on my hip? So they're like grappling, basically, and they're both straining. Feyd-Rautha whispered, your death, fool. And he began twisting himself around, forcing the poisoned needle closer and closer. It'll stop your... what? It'll stop your muscles, and my knife will finish you. There'll be never a trace left to detect. Paul strained, hearing the silent screams in his mind, his cell-stamped ancestors demanding that he use the secret word to slow Feyd-Rautha, to save himself. That's right, because they have, like, in all their layers of training and, you know, all the people that kind of weave these webs around them, they have this kind of word that's meant to kind of, I forget if it's exactly like paralyze them or just snap them into a state of obedience or hesitation. And someone told Paul, probably Jessica, Feyd-Rautha's word before this fight. I will not say it, Paul gasped. So much is at stake. How much does he see beyond? That's the frustrating things about these books. That's where it struggles for me to suspend disbelief in a compelling way. I will not, like, if he has this prescience, what can he see? Oh, well, it just kind of conveniently happens at every moment, every story beat that's supposed to be suspenseful. It's like he can't see, it becomes hazy. And every time he's supposed to do this and like defeat Feyd-Rautha through true honor and holding to the old ways and not, you know, lowering himself to use this manipulative word, it's like, well, will he? It'll, you know, we're supposed to believe there's a lot of risk and tension, but anyway. Feyd-Rautha gaped at, that was poorly explained, and I'm stammering a lot. Feyd-Rautha gaped at him, caught in the merest fraction of hesitation. It was enough for Paul to find the weakness of balance in one of his opponent's leg muscles, and their positions were reversed. Feyd-Rautha lay partly on, so then basically he just gets the needle caught under Feyd-Rautha, and then he's able to thrust up and stab Feyd-Rautha through the jaw. Then he pushes himself up, gets to his feet. Majesty, Paul said, your force is reduced by one more. Shall we now shed sham and pretense? Shall we now discuss what must be? Your daughter wed to me, and the way opened for an Atreides to sit on the throne. The Emperor turned, looked at Count Fenring. The Count met his stare, grey eyes against green. The thought lay there clearly between them, their association so long that understanding could be achieved with a glance. Kill this upstart for me, the Emperor was saying. The Atreides is young and resourceful, yes, but he's also tired from long effort, and he'd be no match for you anyway. Call him out now. You know the way of it. Kill him. Slowly, Fenring moved his head, a prolonged turning until he faced Paul. Do it, the Emperor hissed. The Count focused on Paul, seeing with eyes his Lady Margot had trained in the Bene Gesserit way, aware of the mystery and hidden grandeur about this Atreides youth. I could kill him, Fenring thought, and he knew this for a truth. Something in his own secretive depths stayed the Count then, and he glimpsed briefly, inadequately, the advantage he held over Paul. A way of hiding from the youth, a furtiveness of person and motives that no eye could penetrate. Suddenly no eye can penetrate this. Sorry. Paul, aware of some of this from the way the time nexus boiled, you see, understood at last why he had never seen Fenring along the webs of prescience. See, Fenring was one of the might-have-beens, an almost Kwisatz Haderach, crippled by a flaw in the genetic pattern, a eunuch, his talent concentrated into furtiveness and inner seclusion. A deep compassion for the Count flowed through Paul, the first sense of brotherhood he'd ever experienced. Wow. Key, and they left this out. Fenring, reading Paul's emotion, said, "Majesty, I must refuse." Rage overcame Shaddam IV. He took 2 short steps through the entourage, cuffed Fenring viciously across the jaw. A dark flush spread up and over the Count's face. He looked directly at the Emperor, spoke with deliberate lack of emphasis. "We have been friends, Majesty. What I do now is out of friendship. I shall forget that you struck me." Anyway, I mean, prescience. This is the great hinge upon which all our questions are suspended and explored, positing the character can span all of space-time with his mind and determine all the fine balance of suffering and charisma and sacrifice and aggression and totalitarianism and liberalism versus mercy, you know, that are needed to save human. It's just this very inhuman thing. It's like the ultimate utilitarian supercomputer making a thought experiment, making a story as a thought experiment, but then you can just kind of choose the things you want him to see and not see. You can choose what you want the audience to see and not see. This lets you make the story exactly however you wish, and so you sort of contrive all the drama, and it doesn't matter so much because it's so archetypal and grand. The questions don't really need to resonate in an intimate, startling, oh, I'm experiencing this with the character way. So this godlike prescience works better here than it would in a character-centric story like Game of Thrones or whatever, but it also just becomes this very intentional, alien, overarching, concept-centric story. It's like someone giving the ability to revive from the dead to a wizard. It's like Deus Ex Machina. It's like Deus Ex Machina as a story. You just kind of explore what sort of Deus might wish what sort of thing for the world. I don't know. There's no difference between the profane and the sacred twisted awry. The French thinker Georges Bataille wrote often on the sacred and the profane and the relation between the two. Death and the instant of divine intoxication merge when they both oppose those intentions of good which are based on rational calculation, and death indicates the instant which, insofar as it is instantaneous, renounces the calculated quest for survival, the instant of the new individual being dependent on the death of other beings. Had they not died, there would have been no room for new ones. Reproduction and death condition the immortal renewal of life. They condition the instant which is always new. That is why we can only have a tragic view of the enchantment of life, but that is also why tragedy is the symbol of enchantment. Sacrifice is nothing other than the production of sacred things. The chaos of the mind cannot constitute a reply to the providence of the universe. All it can be is an awakening in the night, where all that can be heard is anguished poetry let loose. If poetry introduces the strange, it does so by means of the familiar. The poetic is the familiar dissolving into the strange, and ourselves with it. It never disposes us entirely, for the words, the images, once dissolved, are charged with emotions already experienced, attached to objects which link them to the known. Romanian thinker, philosopher, religious, secular, sacred, profane writer wrote, Mircea Eliade, I don't know why I didn't actually say his name here. For modern consciousness, a physiological act, eating, sex, and so on, is in some only an organic phenomenon, however much it may still be encumbered by taboos, imposing, for example, particular rules for eating properly or forbidding some sexual behavior disapproved by social morality. But for the primitives, such an act is never simply physiological. It is or can become a sacrament, that is, a communion with the sacred. This is what we hunger for. When we dance madly in our drink, when we take our LSD and lose ourselves to the shuddering of a neon jungle, when we engage in any art or act or music and hope it gives us chills, when we hunger to leave the strictures and the boxes all behind, but in doing so affirm some deeper stricture, a true need within our bones, we hunger for something to possess our gaze and to make it blue with the light of faith, of seeing the unconstructed divinity of the world. In sanctity, there's a presence not only of a certain taboo which it shares with the profane, but also vulnerability, lowness, even dirtiness. We make sacrifices in blood. We cut ourselves. We spit. We are seen naked. It's like sex. You're seen naked. You exchange fluids, open yourself to disease, you make eye contact, huffing like an animal. You have to keep things romantic, which requires a certain grace and wordless communication, but you also have to communicate. You have to know one another deeply enough to do this, but you also have to be exploring. And if you do it lustfully, mindlessly, there are consequences. Sex is an act of life creation, and as such, is sacred. In the sacred, there must be profanity or lowness, because the entire point of the sacred is to call us from the lowness of our nature to its height. It still must touch our nature. It cannot be all glorious sun god, chariot in the sky. It has to come down here somehow. It has to meet us in the mud. And that's why Stilgar is the heart of Villeneuve's Dune. That's why Stilgar resonates with us. Despite the occasional goofiness of the story, despite all the prophecies and zeal being dreadfully on the nose, in this digital secular age of plenty, one could expect these facets of the story to be among the more alien, but they're not. They're the beating heart of it. Of all the themes Herbert weaves together, I'd say these may be the core. Religion, ecology, charismatic leaders, kind of, governance, violence, power, mind over matter, spirit over tech, things like that. Of these, Villeneuve really dug into the religion bit. Now, he put some interesting twists. It's tough to say whether he was trying to predict or just play around. For now, we're becoming much less capable of trusting religion in its traditional form. Okay, let's not word this pretentiously, Jesse. We're becoming less religious, but are we becoming less religious? Are we simply practicing it less, turning to amplify other networks of our being, afraid that it would doom us? Just as we seek to overcome tribalism, as we tremble and roar for singers and Olympians instead of gladiators and Olympians, just as we choose to sit and tap away at little squares of black on a silver box to make strange pixeled lines of black appear on pixeled white, as we choose to do this rather than go out in the wild and use our bodies for hard work beneath the sun, are we becoming less hunter-gatherer? Are we becoming less warlike, less tribal, less religious? Are we becoming less human? Or are we simply twisting it, rechanneling it? Surely on some level, slowly, the genes themselves are changing. That's how they change, after all, with slow use according to fitness and environment. But are we now less needful of religion? Have we shuffled it off completely? We've discovered things like the scientific method, peer review. We've begun to gather information as data, as mathematics, as binary records, outside the oral tradition, outside the transmutation that comes with each generation, with each speaking human mind. We can model things outside of us now, the weather. We model every system of the body. We model value and attention all across the globe. No longer do we encode ourselves in story. No longer do we use our gods. Are we destroying our need for the sacred? Are we escaping it, or are we simply making it yet more untouchable? The face paint of our forefathers, the mad dance around the fire. Our secular and scientific age suggests it's a hole to be filled by understanding, and understanding's fantastic. Even Herbert was an optimist about this, but Dune asks that catching question, that paradox that waits there at the end.
Nothing can live there without faith. Which is why our Bene Gesserit missionaries have been so productive there.
What if the sacred is not a hole to be filled by understanding? What if the further we remove ourselves from wild embodiment of faith, of something, what if it's a void that only grows? We've seen back to the singularity itself. We've seen the formation of the elements on into hot stars and hot planets, into cool planets, into our bodies. We draw it all on paper, from the first life up till ours. We draw the way our brain has formed, and the light that hits our eyes, and the reasons we see the colors that we see. We draw our languages, our gods, our sex. We liberate ourselves. Even music now is just mathematics. That, by the way, is one of my greatest complaints with Herbert's books. I just think he misportrays humanity and its possibilities, technology and its true nature. I think he misportrays reality. He's attempting to awaken us to some spiritual maturity, attempting to critique certain methods and leave others open for consideration. He was an earnest and smart guy, but really, the problem is this simply isn't how it works. There's no conceivable species for whom it could work this way. There's no analog story parallel for spiritual maturity replacing technological advancement. That's the difference between technology and spirituality. Spirituality is this individual, embodied experiential thing. Technology, by definition, exists in the shared space between us of objective science. So we learned rightly to be suspicious of our instincts, to look to reason and to binary model, to divorce ourselves from our calculations, to seek cause and effect without imposing need, and to see where it led. At the bottom, though, at the base, we still must choose a need. We need to choose whether to use nuclear for generation or destruction, to use social media for harmony or rot, to use contraception for wild self-abuse or freedom long stifled. When we split the atom, we hold divinity within our palms, and we must be prepared to wield it. This was the Balerian Jihad, certainly. Computers rose up to consume us, and we realized we had made a monster. Never again, we swore, and somehow we obeyed it, every one of us. It must have been a terrifying war. Herbert favors our chances against malevolent machines much more than I do. But then we made computers of ourselves, mentats, hopefully with the discipline to keep that human core. Again, I think Herbert's off here, but whatever. I'm not here to critique the author's powers of prognostication or human evaluation, at least not in this level. Just know that I have my gripes about the mentats and the Bene Gesserits and the sandworms and the ecology, about the ideal overall of a feudal interstellar government. I have gripes about it, and that's one of the reasons I've never been quite able to suspend disbelief to enjoy Dune like so many others have. But when it comes to the idea of a holy war and the thirst for zeal and a purpose, questions of fate and leadership and the religious spirit in humanity, well, clearly Frank has hit a chord. One has only to hop on Twitter or Reddit to see the most searched scenes on YouTube, and one realizes something strange is being revealed. These climaxes are very not 21st century.
What is happening, Mother? Your brother attacks the great houses. The holy war begins.
And note, I would have done it differently myself. The glances are always the same, the shouting always the same, the faces are stiff, even the jokes feel out of place, except when very well presented by Stilgar and Shishakli.
Woman.
Remember, Abraham went into Sarai and knew her. The same word is used when Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, writes, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths." It's this knowledge, direct knowledge, faith knowledge, knowledge beyond understanding, even beyond the wisdom of Solomon. This is the knowledge that comes only in acting. This is Stilgar. Not acting like Javier Bardem, acting out. This is Stilgar. That's faith. This is, as Irulan says, what keeps the fundamentalists alive in a land that would consume all others. And it doesn't only keep them alive, it makes them an army more dangerous than any other in the galaxy. That is what we hunger for. But now that we do have the scientific method, how will we choose the blindness to embrace? Where will we choose to plot like Emperor Bene Gesserit, and where will long-drawn plans be overrun by the power of our need for faith?